how much do you charge for video, right?
On commercial projects, you might be getting $2,000 a day.
If you give me a budget, I'll give you a vision. But if you give me a vision, I'll give you a budget. Well, welcome to the podcast, Be Frank. We might call it Broske later down the line. We might change the name, but this is the first episode. We have Andrew Smith. Thanks for coming.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks, Yosuke.
Yeah, so people who doesn't know about you, who is Andrew Smith?
Yeah, so my name is Andrew Smith. I've been in the film industry for a long time. I'm assuming that's what we want to talk about today.
Oh, we can talk about anything, honestly.
So I'm 6'7" for people that are just listening. So that gets a lot of looks. We grow tall camera operators here in Oklahoma. So there's me and Justin Floyd and Alan Novi. We're all like 6'5" plus. So
yeah, you can get bird's eye view very easy.
Yeah, exactly. It comes in handy.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, we met in 2013. I was looking at a Facebook yesterday. Yeah. And the Peace, Love, and Zombie.
Yeah.
Is that the first time we met?
I believe so, because I remember it was directed by Ben Halavity, which was also one of my collaborators. We did several 48-hour film festivals together. I still love that whole event. Did one this year and cleaned up at the awards, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Called Leak this year, but back then we were working with Ben Halavity and you came on and what was it again that you were doing on that show?
I think I was just doing like prop master or something, like production design.
I knew it had to do with art, but I wasn't exactly sure. But.
Yeah, I was doing art department back then. I was looking at you and Adam was like filming with the red cameras and stuff. I thought that was like cool things to do, kind of wanted to like pursue, what you were doing. So, I mean, like when I was having the idea of the starting podcast, like I know we worked a couple of times, during like 10 years, 9 years knowing each other. But every time I talk to you, like it's just kind of like you have like those like one sentences or different, like a story that resonates with me, and then take it for like my like a lifetime, like of my career. Oh, so man. I thought about you be best, like, well, this is the first episode, I'm gonna call Andrew, and then you're here, so
I better watch what I say. It's gonna have long-term implications, right?
Yeah, I mean, like first thing, like great. Honestly, like I was telling like my people too, like, well, how can we shoot better B-rolls or something like that? I remember you telling me, say, hey, when you go into the room, look around and then find most interesting things. You told me, I don't know if you remember, you told me that.
I still do that.
Yeah. But do you still do that?
Oh yeah. I mean, as a cinematographer, people hire me because I have a perspective, right? Like, I think that's one of the most valuable things you can have as a visual artist is like you have a unique perspective based on all the experiences that have led you up to this point in your life. Who I am today is not who I was 10 years ago when you met me. And so like, it's really cool to like see that grow, and you're building, along the journey, you're building your intuition, you're walking into these different rooms, you're experiencing new scenarios, new problems to solve. And that's just part of the fun of it. It's like, if you're not down with solving these creative problems, like, pick something else to do where you're excited about solving those problems. Because there's like, I think with any industry, you have to be, just really passionate about and obsessed. You have to be obsessed with like solving these new problems that come up, and then iterate. That's the constant iteration of like, you have to practice and try new things. When something doesn't work, you just try something new and then hope that works instead. So
see, I learn something every day.
Yeah, I can get pretty philosophical. So if you need to land the plane at any time, just let me know.
No, I love it. Like honestly, that what you're saying, I agree. I mean, honestly, whenever we met, I think I asked you like, how did you buy red camera or whatever, and then you told me about you were doing like window cleaning stuff, right?
Yeah. So I started cleaning windows when I was like 16 years old. My dad is super entrepreneurial, and I was doing that. I was doing home remodeling and construction with my dad, and I mowed lawns for a while, and just did a lot of like all kinds of stuff really. And that's been super valuable in my life, you know, because if you can fix things, you're always going to have like skills that, you know, will translate to other things if the main thing that you want to do, it doesn't work out. So,
also you're tall, so that helps out.
Yeah. When I was interning with another window washer in town, he was so jealous of my height because I could just walk around and like with a tall squeegee and do all these 8-foot windows, which is amazing. He's like, man, it would be so fast if I had your height.
So while you were doing that, did you thinking about saving up for the red camera?
Yeah, so I guess that's a good question because I still tell people today, like I don't think you should jump into expensive gear right away, especially with cameras, and they're changing even faster than they were back then. Like there's a new red camera every year. It feels like there's a new Raptor XL or you know, with 35 millimeter or whatever, and you just can't keep up with it unless you're renting it out all the time and you're getting a return on that investment. So if that's what you want to do, if that's what floats your boat, then I say go for it. But also you need to be like responsible with your resources and so for me at the time, that was like, how can I build my career as a cinematographer, and how will I get people to take me seriously as like a young guy trying to break into this whole industry? And at the time, that was my conviction, was like, I got to have a piece of gear that will set me apart from everybody else out there.
Gotcha.
And so I think part of it was my own insecurity at the time, you know, like 10 years ago. Because I remember showing up. So what's interesting is this past weekend, I got hired on by a woman who gave me my first job in Duncan, where I grew up. And I was 19 years old at the time. She gave me my first job doing a campaign video for United Way in Duncan. And so I did this job. I made a lot of mistakes, and I even told her after our wrap the other day, like, oh yeah, I totally recorded over this HDV tape, and I had to literally import it 3 or 4 seconds at a time, and I barely was able to cut that video that I made for you together. And that could have been the end of my career, but because of people like her who believed in me and still do today, like she just hired me for this other job, I was able to kind of grow my career, build my gear, and develop new connections.
So that was your first job?
Yeah, one of my first like video job. I had done other stuff prior to that, like because I had a very small reel of just basically just me playing around. I would do After Effects tutorials and learning visual effects stuff. I did an internship with Steelhouse Production shortly after that up in Tulsa, and did a lot of commercial and music video type of work. A lot of great guys up there. Now they're called like, I can't even remember. It's like a VR company now. So it's changed a lot since I was there, but yeah.
Well, so now like I saw like, you know, I went through your IMDb page yesterday. You have more than like 70 credits, I would say.
Oh man, I don't know what it's up to now, but I've done a lot of short films.
I sent a text. I think, let me see. Maybe I shouldn't pull up my phone during the podcast, but 67 credits.
67, wow. So I've checked it. I don't know, like I updated my resume like last year or something. And I had a bunch of links and stuff that I included in the resume, and it's kind of cool when you see like, oh yeah, but I'm always like, once I finish a project, I'm always like on to the next thing. Okay, what's next? You know? And so I always try not to like get too caught up in the success, even though I like celebrate it, just like let it go and enjoy it, but also like, okay, what's the next thing? So
what made you decide to be a cinematographer? Like, you know, you say you started 19 was a professional gig, right?
Yeah, so 19 was like my first professional gig. And I think what really drew me to it was I always wanted to be an artist, and I would draw stuff a lot, and I was terrible at it. Like a lot of people are just like, so I liked visual, just like composition and that sort of thing. And I had an aunt that she's like an amazing artist and does like a lot of paintings and stuff. And so she would try giving lessons, and I didn't have the patience to really like hone that craft the way that I knew I needed to. So I was like, if I'm going to get really good at something, I need to enjoy the process of the failure that comes with not knowing how to do the thing that you are trying to achieve.
Got you.
So yeah, it's like you have these aspirations and then you realize once you try it, you're like, oh, it's much harder than I originally thought.
Right. It's like anything in life. I mean, like I love being, like doing fitness and stuff, but like I like grinding, like getting like failure or whatever. I enjoy that part of my, the training, and then like even like camera stuff and like, well, this didn't work, and then like it's like a best lighting technique or something like that, when you're like working on, maybe like that might be not the very important scene, but like we light it, okay, change the lighting, let's change the scrim or whatever, what I mean? And then change all the lighting, and then like, oh, you struggle, but like when you get the like a look you want it, like it pays off better. Because if you just light it, oh, this looks good, we shoot it, there's not much meaning. Maybe that's something like you can like be like understand together, but I think a lighting is most interesting part of cinematography. I feel like, I don't know.
I would 100% agree. Like if you can light something really well and maintain consistency, that's like the hardest part of my job. It still is today, and I think it will be probably for the rest of my career. But like lighting something well and making sure it matches from scene to scene, and or at least within a overall structure. Like features are very difficult for that reason, which I've been learning. Is like you really have to pay attention and be basically a guardian of the image, and like don't let other factors play into how what your overarching vision is. So like you can make small compromises, but know where you want to make those and not compromise the overall like end product.
Got you.
So,
I mean, honestly, like I saw your demo, and then like I saw you were going every year. I don't know. You don't post like a demo reel every year type of.
No, not every year. I mean, I have like stuff that I want to share.
Yeah.
And I'm actually pretty terrible at like doing social media shares of like new projects or new frames that I'm doing, because it's like I'm proud of it, but at the same time, like sometimes I just lack the words because I'm a visual artist, like right. I don't always know how to communicate the like this was an amazing project, and I don't want to say that for like every project,
right?
Because then it just gets old,
right?
And I feel like it's disingenuous versus like this is something that I learned on this project, and this is like, or this was a different experience. So that those are always like the unique parts of it, or are things that I want to bring out more of and be able to share those. And you can't do that for everything. So it's like, it's for me, that's like something that I'm not as nearly as good at is marketing myself.
No, I mean, like I saw, like I think a couple months ago you posted a new demo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it, like, man, this is great, like I see your progress. Thanks, and like just cool. And then like when we work together, different commercial, you're using Black Magic camera. You're not using red anymore. I'm like, you're like evolving. That I think that's like something that I respect the people always changing, evolving, and so I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, I think it's critical in any industry, but like in filmmaking where it's changing all the time, you really have to learn the new practices, and like with LED lighting and just you learn from different artists as well. Like I've worked with all these great DPs on features that I've worked on. I've been a camera op for tons of shows now, and like you pick up something on each show, and it's like you need to steal the best parts of like what other people are doing that's right, because then it saves you from all this experience that you have to get to like achieve that same level. And so that's why the internet's a great place, because you can learn from all of these sources.
It's true. So I mean, I saw like back to like IMDb page, but I saw you worked on Minari, and then Reagan. Like that's
Reagan.
Reagan. It was a big movie. Like, what's your like a biggest or like a maybe like favorite movie you worked on? Maybe you can tell me a little bit about it.
Reagan was the biggest show that I worked on. It was Dennis Quaid and John Voight, and it was just like, it was a crazy movie because it was also during like right in the middle of the pandemic, and people didn't know what the protocols were, and we were wearing masks, but there was like three outbreaks on set, and like, so it shut us down for a while. And unfortunately, I didn't get it on that show, but a lot of people on the camera team did, and so, you know, it was a little bit of a scary time, but it was also like super rewarding because it was like I was learning all these new all these new things about lighting, about set design. We had like an Oval Office set built on the stage in Guthrie.
Nice.
And it was just awesome. Like, I was just like, man, this is what like a big show feels like, you know, to have sets like this built and to be able to really play in that space where, you know, a lot of times you just feel, and unlike with any show, the budget never quite lives up to the vision that is like set for. It doesn't matter. I think if it's like 10 million or $50,000, you know, it's like, it's always exceeds what you have, the resources that you have to achieve it.
Yeah, for sure.
And so even like with stuff that I do, that's always one of my goals is like, how can you provide more value than you're taking from the production? And so I think if you can do that, regardless of like what role that you play on a film set or just employed anywhere,
right?
You can always like, how can I just give that a little extra 10 or 20% to like make the job great instead of just passable?
I mean, what do you think about those? Like, I think that's totally interesting about, you know, bringing more value than the budget. I think that whenever I shoot commercial, make a video, it's kind of like, well, this is a job for next job. And then I need to show my value, and then I need to show the viewer audience something more than what they pay for. I mean, that's what I try to do. Right. And then my biggest thing is that some sort of like surprising moment, conflict, or like you're talking about that, you know, perspective, right? There's something they never seen, or something that people will think that a little bit interesting, and then they're watching it. I hate those videos that are like flat, right? So I think that all of my videos are like what we make, even commercial wise, I try to make like a little bit of difference in the story. Yeah. I mean, that's I think that what I bring the value to the table, to the clients or the people we're making the video for. But how do you describe your value, I guess, whenever you're talking about you want to bring the value to the video and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it can be very subjective, but it means something different for every shoot. So like, you know, certain clients or people require different things. So like, you know, something that I do for a feature is completely different than, you know, I'm flying out to Miami to do a job for an event this weekend. So obviously there's much less resources in it. And so like they're looking for like, make it fast and good versus like, we want something that's just good and slow and cheap, you know? Right.
So,
so
good and fast and cheap, you can choose too, right?
Yeah, exactly. They want all the things, and every job wants that, but it's like, and you have to be fast to do this job. You know, you have to let your intuition lead, and also just like have a good plan, because great planning is what makes great work. Yeah. And being able to communicate that plan to the rest of your team. I've learned that in the last couple of years is like being able to communicate to your team precisely what you want out of a shot that's everything. Like whether you're the director, and it's difficult because it's like I could just show you, but then the work would already be done.
Right.
So how can I communicate that and level up my ability? Because I know where I failed a lot is where I just haven't been able to communicate that precisely. And that's something I'm trying to get better at. Yeah. So
what do you do that, like every shoot, either like a small budget or high budget, like, you know, like a high end budget, you can have like storyboard or storyboard artists and all that kind of stuff, but lowest budget. But what do you do for every project to prepare for the project?
I'd say the number one thing that I like to do is look at the location that I'm going to be filming at. And then
you do that every shoot?
I try to do that every shoot because if you don't look at a place, you can get I call it shooting yourself into a corner, where you get stuck into a position where you don't know where the light's going to be at a certain time. If you have windows or things that lighting you can't control, maybe it's on the side of a building that's going to be like, it's fine during the morning, but then it's like a white hot wall in the afternoon. And so there's just situations like that if you don't prepare for, it will come back and bite you later. True. And so I've had that experience, and I'm like, if you go there beforehand and you know when you're going to be shooting there, then you can solve some of those problems. There's always going to be something that comes up, like an actor gets there late, or right. Like something happens where you can't control exactly when you're going to shoot, and then sometimes you have to do it anyways, and then your work suffers for that.
Right.
But those are things outside your control. So it's like, as long as you have the right plan, I feel like it can still work out, but it's just maybe you pivot to like, oh, we wanted to shoot this direction, but now because of the timing, we have to do it this way. So, and those are things you have to be kind of flexible on and talk with the director, and hopefully they're cool with it. Cause sometimes they're like, no, we have to do it this way. There's a sign there that we have to see for this, but you just don't know. Like every project's different. So,
yeah.
But as long as you can look at the location, at least you'll be prepared to see like, oh, okay, we can. But then, sometimes there'll be like the other day we were shooting this commercial, and we had this pool reserved for a certain scene, and then like 30, 40 kids show up from the school, and they're just like splashing around. Unfortunately, it's like, okay, we can kind of like frame them like in the deep background or something, so they're like blurred out. But it's just like, if you don't have complete control of a location too, that stuff like that can come up, and you're just like, well, this is the only day we have to shoot this, so we just have to be a creative like workaround to try and. I
mean, sometimes you gotta make most out of it, Yeah. It just happens.
Yeah, and then the other thing is like try to come up with basically a brief shot list from the script, and that's one thing that I try to do in the space of like, okay, if we're gonna do this, and I try to have the director there too, because you can have completely different ideas of like where you want action to play out. And you're like, well, if you want to shoot into this corner of the room and they want to see it like this, then it can completely change the plan. So right. If you're both on the same page, kind of going into something, then you're not at a conflict of interest, where that's another thing, just goes back to the communication thing and having a good plan that's like cohesive, and both the director of photography and the director is obviously the one that's in charge, and there's no question about that. Like right. They're the ones that make the ultimate decision. But if you guys are both on the same page, that just like elevates the whole project, because then no one else is like arguing about who's right or which right. vision is going to go forward. Right. So
I like to do like, like make my version of it, mm-hmm. and then make editor's version of it whenever I've talked to them. It's never ending argument, right? Like, mm-hmm. Hey, I want to see like this stuff. Editor knows like what they want to edit or whatever. Right. And then like, I'm like, well, why don't you make my version? Mm-hmm. Why don't you make your version?
Yeah.
Let's just compare to see which one is better, I mean, that's kind of how I do it sometimes. But, like you're completely right. It's like communication as like a visual creative. It's like I don't know, textbook, like how to communicate visual, mm-hmm. A to Z, right? Like right. How do you, like, I know you've been doing this for a long time, but like, do you have any process of communicating visual well?
Yeah, so one thing I really enjoy is having mood boards. So you can pull up other stills. I like photography, to kind of get a mood. But people can use like movie stills. There's a site called Shot Deck that's really useful for like pulling stills.
Site called Shot List?
Shot Deck.
Oh, Shot Deck?
Yeah, so it's a site where they have like compiled all these movies. So if you have a specific look that the director is going after, then you can look at different images. You can say like, what is it that you like? And then I start communicating with the director, like, what is it about this image that speaks to you? Like, is it the color? Is it the lighting? Is it the actor's emotion? And then if they're able to like figure out how to describe that feeling, then it's my job as a cinematographer to communicate that visually. So it's a translation process of like being able to figure out what it is, the emotion we're trying to evoke in this scene, and then how do you show that to an audience? And how does that work with like a perspective? Because it can be a very subjective thing,
right?
But it's also the actors' performances, it's the direction, it's the script. Like a film's only as strong as its very weakest link. So
right.
Whether it's the cinematography was great, but the wardrobe was terrible, or the lighting was not that great, or it's all the pieces that add up to
right.
more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, like what I heard like before, I never forget, is like if somebody noticed something was wrong, then it's gonna ruin it.
Mm-hmm.
But and then like for whenever I was doing the art department, set decoration, whatever. If somebody noticed something is wrong, and then you're doing a bad job. But if somebody never notices it, you're doing a fantastic job, right? So I thought that was kind of interesting. True. But also like you mentioned about like a creative, asking communication wise, what kind of mood or lighting, what speaks to the director, right? Like every director or different person has a different idea or value of the word. For example, say be creative, right? Like a lot of people say, just be creative. But like, what does that be creative mean to you, right? Like, because I want to be creative. It's more like story, like a cool looking, or like, like more visual side of things.
Sure.
But to my clients or any other people, creative could be totally different, right?
Right.
What is your definition of creative?
Of creative? Well, that's a good question. I think creativity to me is just the process of making something that's interesting. I'd say that's the most basic definition.
Right.
Of like how to make something interesting. Is like you can make stuff, but it can be really boring or like uninteresting. And I think that goes back to a lot of like study of human nature and what makes you tick as a person. Like, what do you find that's interesting? What kind of media do you enjoy watching or like, experiencing? And then what are those things about those shows that you're not a copycat? And I do think when you're starting your career, I heard this quote the other day. It was like, beginners focus on execution, intermediates focus on strategy, and experts focus on mindset. And so to get through that process, you have to learn how to execute your plan. And then you get through the strategy phase of it, and you're like, okay, if I do this differently, then maybe it'll work out like this in the end. And then the mindset is just like your mental state going into this whole thing where you're not focused on all of the minutia of trying to just do the project. It's like, how can I be in a playful and like joyful state and grateful to these folks that are giving me this opportunity and like give that back in some way. And I think that's a big part of it too, is like, how can you show love to other people? And that's what great art is just like, how can I show this thing that I love to the world? And how can I make something that I want to see more of out there,
To make it more interesting so that other people can take an interest.
Exactly. Because if you're not interested in it, then why should anybody else be?
Right.
And so I think it is kind of like a little bit of a selfish way of looking at creativity, but I think, and it's not just for yourself or your own ego, but it's like, here's something that I really enjoy. It's like somebody who's a baker that's like, I'm making this pie, not just for me, but so I can share this experience with everyone else. And that's like a beautiful thing, right? Like you're at a meal and you're like, this is incredible. It tastes amazing. Wow. And I think it's the same thing or the same idea. It hits different because it's visual,
Right.
But when you see a really great film, you're like, oh, that's the stuff right there. So it's all incredible,
It's like everybody's everything is like a success is overnight success, right? They don't see the hard work.
Exactly.
It's just the things. And then, I mean, like honestly, like I'm having like a different mindset of starting a YouTube stuff. It's like I I don't know. I don't want to put out the content. It's not perfect, right? But like that was my mindset. But I heard, I watched a video before and say, first 100 videos you're going to make, nobody's going to watch it. Who cares? But you're going to be 100 times better and 100 times more understanding of that, you know, your process. And then then you might be a lot farther along than, you know what I mean? Because the social media game and then like some different game is like a little bit different. So that's what I'm trying to do. Like this podcast and stuff, you know, for example, I was getting like background of like a palettes, right? Like, cause I wanted to put the whole palettes down to the background, paint it black, and they will light it nicely.
Yeah.
But
give
like
it some texture.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But like, you know, well, I'm just gonna have the first podcast, you know. It doesn't really matter like how it looks, and then if people can see the journey, if I can show the journey of how far I will be, you know, and then like people might just say, well, they don't have to have, you know, like a soundproof podcast to start with. Maybe eventually I will have it, you know, hopefully.
Yeah, but you will.
So that's kind of mindset I'm trying to do. But what you're talking about, there's like you know, like how long you been doing this?
Like 16 years.
16 years.
16 years professionally. So yeah.
That's awesome. So I mean, I bet you get asked a lot of questions like this. You know, I get started getting asking that question that, you know, how did you get started, right? And then also like a biggest part of it about the creative career is that you have to have like different job first, right?
Right.
And then you have to have a different job, and then you have to start this creative job, and then days like you're working 24/7 and broke, right?
Yes. And that's the worst part.
Right. And then you just eventually make enough money. You quit the first job, and then you be broke, and then you take off someday, right? Hopefully.
Right. Yeah.
So what was your journey like that, or like what would you give advice to those people who are considering going to a creative field?
Oh man, that's a loaded question.
I know.
No, but I think it's a good question. The game's changed a little bit, but the hustle is still the same. You know, like if you don't love, like we were talking about earlier, if you don't love the process of making stuff, and it's probably gonna suck for a long time, and knowing that's just the case, like you don't get to skip steps of that creative process. If you get off the worst day on set and you're like, I had a really rough day, but it's still better than a 9-to-5, then you're probably going to be okay. Because I do remember early on in my career, I had a day like that where it was just like, you know, 16-hour day, 100-degree heat, like it was rough. Yeah, and we like ran out of water on set, which if you're ever in that situation, just quit. Don't put yourself at risk to like finish the day out. But like, fortunately, we were able to like get water by the end of it. But yeah, if you want to do this, like you have to be committed. And I always tell people like, life is a gamble, so bet at something you want to win at. And I think that's just something that I didn't take seriously enough when I got started, because I was always trying to play it safe. Like I didn't have a lot of risk. I had this other job, you know, like I was window cleaning, made decent money. And it was the safe thing. And people have that safe thing. And sometimes you just have to give up the safe thing so that you can do the thing that you really want to do in life. And that the thing that you feel like in your bones that you were like made to do, just go out and try it. You know, maybe you don't have to go give it like 100% at first, because it may not be the thing that is going to give you that fulfillment in life. And I still don't think like you should put 100% of like everything into making your job your whole life, you know, because that's not great either.
Right.
There's been times in my life where I've had that too. But you know, you gotta have that work-life balance. It's hard to have in the film industry, as you know, because it's like, it's pretty all-consuming. You know, filmmaking is easy. All it requires is, you know,
just hit the record.
You know, blood, sweat, tears.
Right.
You know, your first born child, like
a lot of dramas.
Yeah, all your money. But yeah, so, and there's also great resources in Oklahoma now. Like, I was just at Metrotech, Harry Wallahan is a teacher there, and he's like fantastic. You got OCCC. So there's like all these other resources that are out there that people can like check out if they're wanting to learn more. There's also just a ton of resources on YouTube to learn about lighting or camera work or editing or, color grading. There's so many different avenues. So there's not only just one way. We were talking about 48-hour film festival, or that's like another great way to just jump on a team and learn.
You can like an intern.
Yeah, exactly. You could be a production assistant on all these other films that are coming through. And it's a growing industry. So like people need to, if they're interested, just try it out and see if it's for them. So, yeah.
I mean, honestly, like, from like 2013, I met you first. And then, I went to the route of like, okay, I'm going to be cinematographer like you. And then, I did a lot of filmmaking, and I shot a feature in Dallas and those kind of stuff. But I ended up here in doing advertising work. I guess I'm the person couldn't take the filmmaking and like a drama,
sure.
Like all like the process of like, okay, like you have one specific job, kind of, right? And the advertising stuff, commercial, like I get to do like a variety stuff, but I like building my own company. That's kind of stuff. That's kind of what I focused on till today. But like I was so wanted to ask you, why do you call yourself like a cinematographer for movie, or like just like you just love the cinematography, you do film or feature, or you do commercial, whatever? Like, what is your passion? Does that make sense?
I do think I know what you're asking. Basically, like, do you like features or commercial work? Is that kind of what it boils down to? Or
but like you do both, right?
Sure, I do both.
But mainly, which one do you do more, would you say?
That's a good question. I do quite a bit of both. I like to operate and DP for films. However, like commercial work just pays the bills. Right. So, they're two different things, but they're also like, I think, important and feed off each other, because like certain things you learn in the feature world, you can translate into
commercial work,
for commercial work and make things more cinematic. So like not everything has to be so black and white, because there are certain things where you're like, oh, this, because it's commercial or because it's a comedy or whatever, has to all be high key lighting, or versus like if it's a feature, it doesn't all have to be like low key stuff either, which is, it's just, what is your style and how does it best serve the story? And how does your perspective influence that? And so I think all of those, it's like a bunch of things that influence like what you enjoy making. I enjoy both sides, honestly. Like the commercial work is it's quick, it's like
a day or two.
Versus like a feature you're on for like weeks or months sometimes.
Right.
So it can be, they're both rewarding in different ways, I think. Features, you definitely have like more camaraderie and like the film family
like
kind
more
of like environment.
A team and
exactly. Versus like, oh, we're all here to do a job and we have to serve the brand, which can be its own reward, but it's mainly like monetary.
Right.
So,
I mean, honestly, like I do respect what you do, and then like honestly, like I think that like I admire your like type of making a relationship with your directors, crews and all that kind of stuff. I think that's why you're such a successful, because you have a relationship with a lot of people you work with, and then a lot of people that sometimes that's new upcoming people.
Sure.
Like a lack of is like that. Okay, I got a skill, I got this camera, so they think that they're gonna have the new job.
Right.
But if they don't know people, or if they kind of burn the bridges or whatever.
Right.
But like what's your mindset with the working people?
Oh man, those are all hard lessons that we have to learn when we're getting into this industry. Like, you don't want to burn any bridges. Oklahoma's too small for that.
Right.
You want to make people feel good about themselves and about working with you at the end of the day. even if you have to like make some sacrifices to make them feel good. Like, you know, and everybody's going to make mistakes. I still make mistakes a lot of mistakes. So I don't want to say that I'm
new
perfect.
mistakes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, they're all small, but they're, you know, the fewer mistakes that you have that involve other people, those are the things that people won't forget of, like how you treated them, even if you did make a big mistake on a job and maybe it wasn't a perfect image, or, you know, maybe your lighting sucked or whatever it was, but how you treated them, and are they going to want to work with you again in the future? Those are always things that I like in the back of my head, because I've had amazing bosses and I've had terrible bosses. So like people that, and it comes back to communication, and being able to like know that we're not doing anything that's life-saving. We're making movies. We're not, you know, doing surgery or anything like that.
Right.
So it can be very high stress, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that a lot of people take things a little too seriously sometimes, where a good plan will prevent a lot of that, like unneeded stress. And if you can do that and also not depend on just your gear to like carry you, especially like for me, I think that was one of my early flaws, I guess, just getting into this with my Red camera. I was like, oh, I'm going to get all these jobs because I have a Red now. That's not the way it works. Like, you have to have those connections, those people that believe in you, like this woman that rehired me, you know, like after all these years, we're working together again. And because like we built that relationship, and like I came back later and was like, hey, do you have any other work? And sometimes that's all it takes, is just touching base with people that you've worked with in the past and be like, hey, I know we haven't talked in a while, but like, what other projects are you got coming up? And like, how can I help on those things? Because, you know, I've just, you coming to the 48 hour to help on props or something, you know, just on your off days, this is something we all love. We all love the creativity of it, and getting involved in these 48 hour films that don't pay anything, right? But they're creatively fulfilling. You get to work with new people. That's the main reason I still do it, is like all of those things, and working with new people and expanding your list of contacts. Mm-hmm. So they're like, now I know people that can do this job or that job, or they might even hire me on jobs when they get to a certain place where they can make those creative decisions. You know, you just never know where people's paths are going to take them. And, you know,
that is so true. So, like every time like you on set, like I'm on set, like, you know, I just tell people like, try to look busy. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like a lot of people, like new people, like come to work for me or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, oh, they didn't ever tell me to do, so I was just taking a break, you know? Sure. Like the best advice I got from, like, I was working on a feature film or whatever, like, hey, the cable's everywhere, you know? Like that bag is there, like it's not organized. Mm-hmm. And then also like that lighting needs a sandbag or whatever. Yeah. Every like between the takes, you know, just be busy, do whatever. Yeah. And then I was just kept doing that, you know. And then like people noticed you as like a hardworking person. Yeah, absolutely. Then like they will say, oh, that guy's a hardworking person. Right. I'm going to call that person to be a production assistant next time, you know? Absolutely. So even though you don't know anything, you know, I think that's like part of a lot of people forget to, it's just, you know, value of the hardworking. And then another thing is just asking people, like when you're on set, like for 48-hour film festival or whatever, but if they treat like, oh, I'm not getting paid for this, right? So they work like they're not getting paid for, then they will never get paid for. Exactly. Work like you're getting paid for it, even if you're not, because people will notice that and then decide whether you're not worth hiring in the future. Yeah, so that's totally accurate. Yeah, and then so like my philosophy is always that, you know, just show your hard work and then show the value, and then always say what's going on with the next project, and then they will ask you, you know, like it's just a one question will get you to like be successful or not successful. It's kind of simple. It is it's a simple recipe and it's hard to execute. Exactly. It's easy to say, but you know, so I mean, this is a kind of question I get to ask all the time, but you know, you told me this before, is like, you know, how much do you charge for video, right? And then I remember we were having a conversation and you told me that if you quote it 5 times and then if you get a job 3 times, that's the best price.
Right.
So like if you get rejected 5 times out of 5, then you're too expensive. And then if you get hired for 5 times out of 5, you're too cheap.
Yes.
I think we had this conversation.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm surprised you remember that, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. But like, do you, whenever people ask you that question, how much should people charge for the video, right? Like, what do you? Not that answer, right?
Sure.
But like, do you have what advice do you have?
I think you just have to know what your value that you provide is.
It's hard to.
It's hard to put a number on that.
Right.
I do think it's like, you said it yourself. Like, you figured out where that range is, where you're getting, probably, half to 2/3 of your jobs, and there's going to be certain people that just say no because like you're too expensive. Well, maybe they're just too cheap. So, and you can't tell them that because like, they have a price in their head of like what they're trying to achieve and what they're willing to pay for it. Do you
like a day rate or do you like a project-based like pricing?
I mean, it depends. Like with everything, it just depends on the project and how it goes. But I'd say day rate's just easier in general because you're like, I'm going to work this many days. I got, my day rate. And then if I have any gear that I'm renting, now I own lenses. So I have one of the first full sets of anamorphics in the state, Atlas Orion lenses, which is, something I've just bought for this film that I just did. And they're amazing. So like I think, the more gear that you have to rent on projects as well, like the more value you can provide to customers and to just like yourself, honestly, because you're using gear that you're comfortable with. And then that shows in your work because you're not trying to use something that you've never used before. And you're like, I don't know how to use this thing and I don't know where to put it to elevate, the production or whatever. So
yeah, sometimes, like it's hard for me, like whenever I interview employee or something, right? And then they come to me, like they ask for a salary or hourly rate, right? And then what I've noticed, like many times they say, well, I have to live in this lifestyle, this apartment, and then, I'm going to work here full time. I need this much. I'm like, well, I don't really care too much about your living situation.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what can you do for me?
Sure.
What value you bring it to the table? Like, it's kind of like, how do you decide day rate, I guess?
I think it goes back to like how much value are you providing? So for me, I've got 16 years of experience. So I'm just right out the gate, I'm worth more than somebody who has a red and has no experience.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can have all the great tools and not know how to use it and still think you're worth more than you are,
right?
Because you have fancy gear, versus like I could take a DSLR and make something look pretty great, without a whole lot of tools,
right?
Not to say that I like doing that. It's just possible,
right?
Just because like the gear doesn't make the end result,
right?
However, like it does make it easier to work with, when you know how to use more expensive tools, but when you're getting into it, I think it's great to figure out what style of work that you're going to be doing, because it depends on what you're making, right? Like if you're doing a short film for some student project, you're not going to get that much money. You can expect to get like $200 a day or, like maybe less. And, on commercial projects, you might be getting $2,000 a day. I don't know. Like it just depends on how much you're providing for the production. If you have any gear that's coming with you, like there's just a lot of factors involved. And it could be, more than that even if you're doing the creative side as well. And that's what also people, there's a guy that I follow on Instagram called Chris Doe and or Do, I don't know, but he's a creative like branding consultant, and he talks a lot about pricing structure and like, what is the value of just someone drawing a brand out? Because like, the person that did the Nike logo got paid like $35 or something stupidly low.
Right.
But that's like $1 billion brand now.
Right.
So is their work worth any less because they did it for so cheap? Or were they just wildly underpaid for the amount of value that they actually provided?
Right.
So now if they were to redo that brand, it would be much more expensive just because the perceived value of the brand is so much higher. And then brands are always like reinventing themselves. So like, I think at every incremental stage where you're leveling up your ability, where you come out with a new reel, or you're working with new people, you probably need to reevaluate like your overall vision of like what do you want to work more in? Like, are you doing more commercials? Are you doing more features? And then what's the budget range that you consistently can get hired for? And then figure out where you need to price yourself competitively in that market and get the amount of work that it takes to live the lifestyle that you want to live.
Right. And then do you look at like other cinematographer charges and all that stuff too?
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to other people in the local area. Like, as we both know, in Oklahoma, the pricing is significantly lower than if we were in LA or Chicago or New York. So, but also the cost of living is much lower here too.
Right.
So those are all factors that, you have to consider. That's why I like working out of state when I can, because it's also like, higher paying gigs usually. I fly there, I do the job, they pay for my hotel and like
flights.
Flights and such. And then I get to live here, and the cost of living is much cheaper.
It's something interesting what you said about like whenever you're leveling up or you're working with new people, then you can kind of reevaluate, right?
Right.
But like whenever because I have sometimes a problem is like it's such an blessing to work with the people for a long time.
Absolutely,
period of time.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
But whenever I started working, let's say I know this client for like 7 years now.
Oh yeah.
I charge them for one video for this cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I know what I'm worth now. You know what I
Right.
mean? But it's kind of hard to like ask them, say, hey, I'm better now. You know what I mean? But like, it's kind of like, they're like, give me more,
Yeah.
Do you have that
I've run into this exact problem before.
Right.
And what happens is, you work for somebody for so long.
Yeah.
And then especially if you're working with them pretty often, like every few months or something, and they don't know that you've been working on all these other jobs, and they may see progressively that you've gotten better over time.
Right.
Versus like somebody that you work with, once every couple years where there's like huge jumps in your skill gap,
Right.
like, of like where you've been able to like, oh, this person's actually like much more intuitive, they're easier to work with, they're, just more better quality product. So when you have customers like that, and one of the guys that I've been working with forever, like over 10 years, we just had a pricing reevaluation recently, and it's tough because like you want to jump up like 50% from what you started with, and they're like, well, how do I do this? Because I've been charging so little for so long that now I need to like completely, and I don't want to throw away this relationship because it's like consistent work,
right?
And he's a good guy to work with, so like pays on time and all the other things that you want in a customer and interesting work. So, but it's a challenge because then you have to like approach that. And I was like, hey, these are the new, and one of the things I addressed was like, hey, inflation's happened. Like my prices are going to have to like accommodate that.
Right.
And so like, rent's gone up, food has gone up, like everything. So.
Did he take you?
Those are just conversations you have to have probably sooner rather than later. Cause like if it's all a surprise and like a massive jump,
right.
Like I think that was a little bit more of like than what he was anticipating, but I think he was expecting me to raise my prices at some point.
Right.
So it just became like this talk of like, okay, what we've been doing has been working great, but like, let's figure out a way that we're both, happy with the compensation that's happening. And so one of the things that we decided was I was either going to do less work for the same amount of money so I could keep the same pricing structure that I had, or I was going to get paid more and keep the same workload. And so that was like kind of a good compromise. So it's always good to like give people different options so that it doesn't feel like a ultimatum when you ask them for something, which is something I've been bad about in the past of like, okay, it's either this way or like I'm not going to be able to work with you anymore.
Right.
So
I think that I have that same problem sometimes too, but you know, like I think that there's a lot of people don't see as a creative is like we're flexible, kind of like a lot of people think that they do this pricing. I mean, like, and then like even like we make a website or something like that.
Sure.
Say we ask for, let's say $10,000 to build a website, and then they like came back to say, well, we only have like $6,000. You guys are too expensive. Well, you ask for this feature, but if you don't want this feature, we can do for $6,000 for you. You know, I think it just communication, right, comes back to it. And then honestly, like whenever I talk to the video production, to the budgeting, I always say, well, if you give me a budget, I'll give you a vision. But if you give me a vision, I'll give you a budget. I mean, that's kind of, I say that to all the time, and then they're like, okay, you know. But that's something.
Yeah, that's really well put.
I use that all the time, and then they kind of like that.
Well, and it goes back to perceived value. Like I think people, because of the internet, think, oh, we can just hire some person that does TikTok to recognize your value as higher. What is it in your own mind of like what you perceive as value, you know, production value? Let's just put that out there as a term. What does that mean to the client? What does that mean to you?
Right.
And so whenever there's a problem, usually it's the disconnect between your vision and their vision.
Expectations.
Yeah, right? Expectations. Yeah. And then the reality of like, okay, well, if we do this, it's going to cost us this much because there's all these logistical pieces or, you know, people that we have to hire to get the results that you're looking for.
Right.
Now you can hire someone to go shoot this on their iPhone, but it's not going to look nearly as great as if we shoot it on, you know, a Red or Alexa and these lenses.
How do you even explain? I'm curious, you know, like perceived value and then production value, right? And then you talking about you just got anamorphic lenses, right?
Right.
And then do you like even try to explain anamorphic lens to the people who doesn't really know anamorphic lens?
That's a great question because there's a lot of, I guess, technical mysticism that happens in our job, right? Like you can explain things about, you know, color space or gamuts or, you know, just like all sorts of things that just go right over most people's heads. Like anamorphic, you know, you can give them fun facts about it. Like, oh, these are invented so that that tank gunners could actually see like a wider field of view, and then they adapted them to shoot for movies, to get people to go back to the movie theaters after that, you know, people had televisions in their houses. So like you can tell them interesting stories like that, but it's not going to elevate the perceived value until they actually see the images that it creates. So it's always, whether, you know, a show don't tell in the whole movie business. It's much easier said than done. But if you're showing the client what results that you can get and the difference between that and something that's more standard, then sometimes that requires spec work because what you can create on this budget is going to be different than somebody on $100 million budget, you know, like,
right.
So there's a certain level that you don't want to oversell it because you can also shoot yourself in the foot that way of like, oh, if you spend this much more money, then it's going to look like this. Well, if your skill level doesn't match that, even if you had all the money, you wouldn't be able to achieve that result. So I think that's what a lot of people don't realize is that because you're building this incremental body of work that you can show to people, then you can also back up everything you've done in the past. You're selling them not only the experience that you have, but all the mistakes that you're not going to make on their set because you already made them back here. Hopefully,
that's true.
You know, some mistakes, you know, are just hard to overcome. But like, that's what somebody's buying when they hire you or me or somebody with, you know, that decade worth of experience that some person that's just new won't understand. So But film industry is changing very quickly. AI is like coming to take all of our jobs.
That is true. People can't write the script.
Yeah, it can write the script. It can make the film. Like it can probably act for us. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't know. I just think that storytelling skill won't be replaced by AI, but there's a lot of technical things could be replaced. But I think part of the human brain only, I think that there is gonna be a lot more jobs for that technical to use AI to make it better. But there's certain creativity or what makes it interesting, perspective, those kind of things. Maybe AI will replace us, but till then, I think we're good. I know that this is like a year now or so. I wanted to ask a couple questions if you're okay. That I didn't go through it, so hopefully you can come back maybe a year from now.
Part two,
sometimes. But like I think kind of like I would like to ask, what advice do you give yourself to the 5 years ago yourself?
5 years ago, me, probably like what we were talking about earlier is when you decide you want to do something, just give it 100%. Like don't and put yourself in a position with people that are going to help you achieve those goals. And that's one thing I don't think I did early on in my career of like, how can I make these contacts where I'm constantly working? Even if I'm not getting paid, you still have to do the work. So it's like, put yourself in a role where, and I didn't want an agency job for like a variety of reasons, but my freedom is very valuable to me. Like I love working with agencies, commercial agencies, and but it also, like I value that freedom. And I also think that because I'm able to freelance with different agencies, I can bring more value because I'm bringing all the contacts that I have with me if I need to on different jobs. I know post people. I had someone in Nashville edit one of my films, and then he made a connection with a woman who, her name was Ariana Rising Star, and she has been a colorist for a long time, but she's done Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande music videos and just like top of her class. So like this, having her on my production made me like my work just looked 10 times better than it did before. It's just like one little piece to that post-production puzzle, like instantly elevated everything. And so having those connections and knowing where to go when you run into those things where you have a client that wants it to look a certain way, and suddenly now you have a person that does that day in, day out, every day, and they're going to bring that extra level of like production value that you need. And so it's not that you have to do everything yourself. I think it's no man's an island in this business. You have to build your collaborators. And I think that's what I would tell myself 5 years ago, is like build the tribe of people that you want to work with and make stuff with them. So
awesome. What about how do you see yourself in 5 years?
In 5 years, wow. These are all great questions, Yosuke. I guess my 5-year plan is I just did a feature film. I really enjoyed that process. I know I'll probably be doing another feature film at some point in the next 5 years. I will probably still be doing like more, just learning all the time. Lighting is something that I'm still like, every day I'm like, I got to learn more. I got to do, I got to figure out how to get the same results of like what I'm seeing is possible. Because sometimes you see it and you're like, how can I make this a consistent thing? Where sometimes you stumble on something by accident and you're like, oh, I need to like put that in my back pocket so I can remember to study it later. Because, the first time it's like, you just stumble across it and you're like, oh, this is a little creative like thing that I didn't know before.
Right.
And yeah, never discount those moments, because it's like, it can be real gold.
It could be difference maker, honestly.
Right. And I think that's that's how you have to approach every project, with that kind of like wonder of like, oh, this is a new project. I'm so grateful to be here doing this for a living. It's like amazing. And there are jobs where it's like, it's a real grind, but at the end of the day, it's like still better than a 9-to-5 job. So.
I mean, like if you're doing it for longer than 16 years and you can still feel that, I mean, that's a blessing, and that's
absolutely,
you know, so it's a passion and love, and it's all good, you know, if you do that, you know.
Right.
Well, do you have any question for me? Or are we good?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things, I think I wrote it down, but I was going to ask you, because I don't know if I've ever talked to you. Why did you get into MMA? What was it that like drew you to that? And
the MMA.
And
so
why is your name Joe Rogan, and why are we on this podcast?
I wish, hopefully, maybe someday, right? 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, like whenever I was growing up in Japan, and actually my sister started taking karate class first. And then I was like kind of growing up in the kind of little bit rough neighborhood. And then I was like fighting or whatever in the school. And then my sister was going to karate class. And so like I was like, let me go try the karate class. So I went to karate class, and then karate teacher told me that I can't go into the kids class. I was like, why? Because like, no, come to like adult class. So I went there, and then I think I remember I was like maybe like 15 or 16. There was like 16 and like 18 and lower class,
right.
But I couldn't go there. So then I went there, and then I remember like 3 months straight I did jump ropes and shadow boxing, and I couldn't even hit a punching bags or mitts or anything. I just doing jump ropes and shadow boxing. And I got so tired of it, I talked to him, said, hey, I'm like tired of this stuff, you know? And then like, I'm going to quit. And he's like, come on, come spar. So I sparred, and he just kicked my ass, kicked my leg real hard, right?
Yeah.
And I just went down. And I remember that day he told me, say, if you know you're strong, you don't have to show it. That's what he told me. And then that resonates me till today. And then that's why I trained for the fighting style or like a physical discipline sports. I never had a quitting moment. To get into the cage was that I was trained for so long, and then little bit of back of my head that I never been to the cage. Like a lot of people ask me, say, right. Have you been to a cage? I'm now just no, you know. So then like I just feel like, well, I will not have this feeling if I get in the cage, and then I can say I fought it before, and then I don't have to be showing like I'm strong, right? Because like my teacher told me, if you're strong, you don't have to show it. So if I know I went in the cage, I don't have to.
Oh man.
Right. So that's kind of why that's the reason I went to the MMA cage. And then now people ask me, have you won before? So I have to win one. So I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to do that next year.
Yeah.
You know, it's supposed to be December. I think, you know, my goal is to not be a, you know, professional fighter or anything like that.
Sure.
But my goal is to, you know, prove to myself, and then also like if I can inspire other people to not fighting or anything like that, but if I can inspire some people to say, well, that guy with a broken English can do this in America, then maybe I could, you know. That's kind of why I'm doing this podcast and YouTube and fighting. It's kind of same thing. It's just like I'm proving myself that I'm strong, so I don't have to. I guess I'm showing it, but like, you know, in the podcast or whatever, but that's kind of why.
I'll remember that next time somebody asks me to work for exposure. I'm strong. I don't have to show it unless I want to do it.
Yeah.
So that's great. One last question for you, Yosuke. Okay. If you knew success was guaranteed, what would you attempt?
That's a good question. Success was guaranteed, what would I attempt? I would say I will attempt to have no bullying, or maybe no child labor.
No what?
No child labor.
Oh, child labor. Okay.
Yeah, that's why I'm just kind of big into that. Maybe let me think it.
As like a social justice thing, like no child labor.
Well, if I want to be like, I want to be like probably like Tom Brady. That'd be cool.
Tom Brady. Okay.
NFL quarterback.
Yeah.
But like to be like, like for social justice, I would like to a lot of no child labor, or like the child gets education, then they can be whatever they want to if they put their effort to it. But if they don't, then they should be miserable, whatever. But it's just like I want to give everybody a chance. What about you?
Oh man, one of the things that I've been thinking about actually when the pandemic hit, I was like, what would I like to try while I've got this free time on my hands, and like I've always wanted to create like some sort of video game.
Oh, cool.
So that's something I would want to try, but I just feel like I don't know enough about coding to really like even attempt that. So like the visual side of it fascinates me.
Right.
And they're using a game engine for all these volumes that they're doing with like and replacing green screen with that. So I think that is those two worlds are kind of merging, and eventually I'll get my dream. But yeah, you will.
I mean, you can learn the coding, right? Too. Right?
I guess that's much less noble than Indian child labor.
No. I mean, I went too deep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, thanks for coming out.
Thank you so much for having me on. Yosuke.
It was a good time.
It was a pleasure.
I'm glad that you were my first podcast guest. You made it very easy. You talked the whole time, so thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right, I guess.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.